Good evening, everyone. My name's E.R. Anderson. I'm the executive director of Charis Circle. Charis Circle is the nonprofit programming arm of Charis Books, and Charis Books is the South's oldest independent feminist bookstore. We really wish that we were all gathered together in the living room space of Charis Books, but I'm really thrilled that we get to do this virtual event tonight. We have two amazing co-sponsors who are our ride or die co-sponsors lately. So first, I'm going to introduce the Lola. The Lola is a women's co-working space that is so much more than that. It's a place to really, especially during the pandemic, connect with other people as you're trying to, figure out what's next for you, generate ideas, work on your activism, work on your income generating stuff, whatever you got going on. The Lola is a great place to be. So check the Lola out. And I want to honor the Auburn Avenue Research Library and our relationship with them, which has just been so enriching. So without further ado, I want to welcome Tamika Middleton. Tamika is an organizer, doula, midwifery apprentice, writer, and unschooling mama who is passionate about and active in struggles that affect Black women's lives. Tamika is organized for abolition, reproductive justice, and for domestic workers' rights. She is a consultant with Winds of Change Consulting, and a founding member of the Metro Atlanta Mutual Aid Fund and Just Georgia. She serves as a community advisory board member of Critical Resistance, a leadership team member of the Kindred Southern Healing Justice Collective, and a treasurer of OHRB. Tamika is a member of Echoing Ida, a community of Black women and non-binary writers, and has had her work featured in multiple publications. So welcome, Tamika. Thank you for being our conversation doula tonight, and welcome to you all. We're very glad to have you at Charis.
Thank you so much, and welcome everyone. Thank y'all for coming on this lovely Tuesday evening, the inauguration eve. And we are grateful for all of you, and I am so grateful to be able to be here with these lovelies on the screen. I am in the latest, the most recent cohort of IDAs, and so these are some of the OGs. So I'm really, really grateful to be here with y'all. We are not able to be in the living room of Charis, but we want to make it feel like this is our own virtual living room. So get comfortable, get cozy, take care of yourselves. If you need to step away, do what you need to do. But we will be here. And we also want to invite you to really immerse and reflect as things are happening too. If you want to write things down, if you want to drop things in the chat, if you want to ask questions, please do. And we will have a great time together this evening. So first things first, I want to introduce you to all of the amazing people on our screen. And so I will start first up with who's on the top left of my screen, which is Quita Tinsley Peterson. Quita Tinsley Peterson is a Black queer femme that writes, organizes, and fights for reproductive justice and queer liberation in the South. As a Black non-binary Southerner, it is through their lived experiences that Quita has come to believe in the power of storytelling and collective resistance. Thank you, Quita, for being here. Then next up, we have Dr. Cynthia Greenlee, who is a North Carolina-based historian, writer, and co-editor of the Echoing Ida collection. She is the recipient of a 2020 James Beard Foundation Award, which is basically an Oscar for food writing. And you can see her work anthologized here and in Best American Food Writing or published in the New York Times, Smithsonian, Elle, Vox, and Vice. She's also senior editor at thecounter.org, a publication about the business, culture, and politics of food. Thank you, Cynthia, for being here. Then next up, we have Samantha Daly. Samantha is a Jamaican queer Black feminist who is passionate about all things that are sex positive, herbalism, and champagne socialism. She is a co-founder of the Carib Healing Collective. Her passion for working with youth, organizing, and building alternative structures have her ready to build resources in this new year as a development manager for BYP 100. You can find her building community, twerking, or jumping on a plane for her next big adventure. Welcome, Samantha. And finally, we have Bianca. Bianca is a project management coach for activists, a community taught carpenter, and a neighborhood auntie learning guitar with young folks. Bianca can be found giggling at their own terrible dad jokes with their family most weekends. They've been part of Echoing Ida since 2013 and now work at Forward together. You can connect with Bianca on IG at Spectra Wellness. So welcome, welcome, welcome. Thank you so much. how we're going to start this is with some readings, some excerpts from the anthology. So I would like to start us off with Quita. Quita, can you read your piece that you are sharing with us this evening?
Yes, I can definitely hop into it for y'all. So the piece I'll be reading from tonight is titled Learning to Love It. Yes, even that, boob sweat and more. So we just hop it right into it. So I live in Atlanta, or as some people who are clearly not from Georgia call it, Hotlanta. This nickname doesn't come lightly. Summers in the South can be hot as hell. I spend many hours throughout the summer worried about boob sweat, the sweat that accumulates under the breast. Yeah, that one. I'm worried that it can be seen through my clothes, and more than that, I'm worried that others will smell it. Because of my past work in fragrance retail, I've learned the art of smelling like a fruit basket or a floral arrangement to avoid that nightmare. But why is it a nightmare? Why is the thought of someone being able to smell my body cooling itself down so frightening? It's normal, whatever normal means. Boobs, armpits, backs of the knees, and genitals all sweat because skin sweats. Does rejecting the notion that a bodily function is gross make me a radical feminist warrior? I am a radical Black feminist, but that's not why. At some point, I made a commitment to myself to practice self-love, self-care, and body positivity. As a fat Black woman, I felt it was necessary to my life and work to be intentional in the ways in which I treat and think of my body. However, when we're talking about self-love and body positivity, we should also be challenging ourselves to discuss and critique the ways in which we neglect what we deem gross and yucky. We can't talk about embracing our fat without embracing the skin between our fat rolls. The yucky parts of our bodies aren't any less deserving of intentional love. We should devote more intentional time to caring for those parts of ourselves. And I'll skip to the end, so the next time you're about to call a part of yourself gross, pause, take a breath, and reflect. From there, think of the ways that you can love and care for that part of yourself. And always remember the wise words of Queen Beyonce, you wake up flawless. Thanks, y'all.
Thank you so much, Quita. And that's a great way for us to jump in. I want to pass it next to Bianca.
I love starting it this way. The reading I have takes a different turn, so just hold on to Quita's like excitement and joy and self-love, and remember that everybody survives this reading, or what happens in this reading. So I'm going to read a piece that feels really relevant to the times that we're in right now. And it feels relevant to the times that we've always been in. This was written several years ago. And just for trigger warning and transparency, there is talk about someone with a gun. But like I said, hold on to that joy because everybody lives and we will continue thriving as a community anyway. So here we go. While out shopping in Georgia at my favorite bookstore, feminist bookstore, we're not naming names, but I think you all can probably guess which amazing feminist Atlanta bookstore I'm talking about. But while out shopping in Georgia at my favorite bookstore, the same day that Emmanuel AME Church reopened its doors after white supremacist Dylan Roof murdered 9 Black Christians during Wednesday night Bible study, a white man in camouflage entered the store, openly carrying a gun on his hip. In my home state, we'd recently allowed licensed individuals to bring their guns into bars, churches, campus colleges, college campuses, all for the sake of safety. In this moment, at the bookstore, I realized that such a gun control law only ensures that certain people feel safe, while others who do not wish to own a gun are left feeling powerless. This tense moment was still too soon after Charleston, after the deaths of Eric Garner and Rekia Boyd. And even too soon after Emmett Till, too soon after cops in Georgia attacked Kenya Harris until she miscarried. Too soon after, because I haven't even processed the constant surveillance and persecution I experienced as a dark-skinned Black person navigating a society where I can be tried and executed in the streets without a jury. The gun-toting man had a wide-shouldered build and was probably shorter than me once he took off his combat boots. And looking back, I probably could have taken him in a fair fight because Lord knows I've fought men bigger than him before. The bookstore employee who will go down in history as my favorite bookstore employee ever immediately said to the man, "Whoa, that's a gun!" That makes me uncomfortable. Anywhere you sit in the store, you could hear his reply. "Well, it shouldn't be a problem so long as I don't feel threatened." The way his voice trailed off as his eyes panned the room froze me temporarily. I tucked myself behind a bookshelf where I could still hear and see what was happening. He said he also had an open carry license, if that made any of us feel safe or comfortable. And then, to change the subject as if carrying a gun in a bookstore is no big deal at all, he shared that he had been scoping out the bookstore for some time, but had only just decided to stop in. Something was motivating him that day. I popped my head over a bookshelf to lock eyes with the bookstore employee. We widened our gaze and raised our brows at each other to non-verbally confirm that this situation was indeed absurd. But what troubled me most about the situation was that it was happening with the realization that our legislative system was working as it intended in that moment. Long before I walked in to buy a copy of Octavia's Brood so that I could think about the world where my body is free through activism-driven science fiction, the system set things up with discriminatory gun control laws. The idea of openly carrying a gun to protect myself has never been a realistic option. In reality, if the cops saw me with a gun, a bag of Skittles, or even a loose cigarette, they would probably shoot me and ask questions about my permit later. As a Jamaican American whose parents had to navigate this country's unjust immigration system, I've grown up always knowing that papers and permits do not save dark-skinned people. And so now, Georgia's open carry policy, the Second Amendment of the US Constitution, and the whole foundation of America's justice system works as it was always intended, allowing certain people to feel safe at the expense of others, at the expense of me, existing in fear. I was without arms and face-to-face with a man who may or may not have wanted to kill me, and a man who ultimately had the freedom to make that decision without any repercussions. As he approached me in the corner of the store, my heart raced as I thought about the families of the victims and the 9 people who were put to rest in Charleston. I kept thinking about Sanders, who jumped in front of a bullet to defend his aunt, Susie Jackson. I wonder if I could drum up that courage. I wondered if Cynthia Hurd was as frozen as I was. She was not a victim, her brother said in a public remark, days after her murder. She was a Christian. She was a soldier. She was a warrior. I wonder if Elder Ethel Lance felt as caught off guard by someone who could pray with you and then unload 70 rounds of bullets into innocent people. I thanked the employee, a fellow woman of color, repeatedly in my head for maintaining calm in that moment of uncertainty. The man and I stood for a moment, side by side, browsing titles like, "Does Your Mama Know?" It was a split second. Then I darted away to the middle of the store in 3 wide steps. After he burrowed his nose into every corner of the bookstore, all he bought were 2 pins with probably the most unpolitical messaging on them. I didn't get to see them, but I know the store carries some very alluring pins of cats, so maybe he got those. At the counter, he showed the employee his Harry Potter tattoo. He made uncomfortable comments about how the tattoo reminds him of seeking truth and justice against liars, loud enough for all of us to hear. He talked about his no good ex. He said his open carry ensures that his son respects him. Do you need a bag? The bookstore employee interrupted, making it clear that it was time for him to go. Once he left, the rest of us still in the store let out a communal belly-deep sigh. One customer noticed that subconsciously all the books they had collected to purchase were suddenly about men and violence. Oppression can preoccupy our safe spaces, even our minds. My fellow customers' comment allowed all of us in the store to laugh and begin to process what had just happened. I don't know why he came in armed. I don't know what his intentions were. I don't want to know. I want to know a world where I don't have to be caught up in fear in the first place. I want a world where none of us feel the need to carry a gun. A world where the Confederate flag and the CVS aren't more important to our political leaders than 7 burning churches, the countless dead at the hands of a militarized police, and those empowered with the false hubris of white supremacy. People like me, and hopefully you, are trying to make that world a reality here and now. Reed Newsom took the Confederate flag down from South Carolina State House with her bare hands. Emmanuel AME Church reopened its doors when I'm sure domestic terrorists and other right-wing extremist groups were hoping they'd stay closed. Not only are these activists not giving in to pressure, but they're reminding all of us that the world we're fighting for uses love to overpower violence. Sanders' 5-year-old niece, just by virtue of surviving the shooting by playing dead, is proof of Audre Lorde's prophesizing. No, we were never meant to survive, Lord. And so whenever we end up doing so, we are being revolutionary, perhaps even futuristic.
Thank you so much, Bianca. Thank you. Next, we are going to go to Samantha, who is going to share from a piece that she has in the book as well.
Can folks hear me? Great, awesome. Hi, everyone. Good evening. I'll just invite us all to take like a collective breath in with a good audible breathing out if you need or invite you to. That was heavy and beautiful, so thank you, Bianca, for sharing. The piece I'm reading from is actually a piece that I collaborated with Bianca and Ruth G. Noel. We are the folks that helped co-create the Care Healing Collective, and the piece I'm reading from is called Herbs That Fortify Us. Herbs have been healing me and sustaining me from the womb. But until the Carib Healing Collective, I didn't feel connected to them. Learning the rituals and wisdom through herbs is a part of uncovering my history. And as a wise doula Carmen said, it is a part of coming for all my grandma's shit. My relationship with herbalism is very much from my Jamaican background and began with herb and liquor elixirs to ease my asthma. I think it's crucial to realize just how much nature and herbs sustain us all in our daily lives. They've helped me heal from injuries, both mental and physical, and have helped pull me up from the depths of depression when I felt like I wasn't enough. Herbs have poured into me, and a part of my journey with CHC is to pour back into them and to thank them for all the ways they kept me and continue to keep me. My offering is a tea that both relaxes and fills me with warmth, desire, and deep restfulness. And I'm gonna share the recipe because, I think it can continue to heal folks. So it's my calming and relaxing tea. It's a teaspoon of lavender to help nausea, headaches, upset stomach, and bloating. 2 to 3 teaspoons of rosebuds detoxifies. It's an anti-inflammatory and it's good for the skin. 2 to 3 teaspoons of moringa, also an anti-inflammatory and just a general all over feel-good herb. And 1 to 3 teaspoons of lemongrass to relieve anxiety, pain, also with a lot of antioxidants. And then I add honey because I love my things sweet. And also shout out to Bianca for my reference of adding gotu kola and chamomile, which also intensifies this deep relaxing feeling. So when I do it, I add herb ingredients to a cheesecloth or a tea strainer, place in boiling water, steep for 4 to 5 minutes, and then let sit for another 5 minutes to really make sure that you're getting all of the properties from the herbs. And then I add honey. which helps cut the bitterness of the lemongrass. And I invite folks to continue to engage and try on this recipe in the ways that you feel like will help and help feed you and renew you after a hard, long day. It's something I'm about to get into right now. And I just wanted to offer that to the space as we get into more juicy goodness of this anthology. Thank y'all so much for being here.
Thank you, Samantha. Thank you for that. And y'all should really get into the other, there's some more herbal recipes in that piece. You should get the book so you can get the recipes. And the last selection that we will have is from our dear editor, Dr. Cynthia Greenlee. You're muted.
Can you hear me now? All right. Okay. Thank y'all. I'm looking and there are 100 people on here. I see friends and allies, collaborators, Idas. I see my co-editor, Kimmy Alabi. I see other Idas. I see, hey, Charmaine, other folks. So just wanted to shout out to you all because you all are in some way part of our community and many of you are in some ways invisible contributors to this anthology. So I was trying to decide, y'all, whether to read something like deep or something like, you know, weighty and important. I mean, it's all important, but I decided to read something fun. And so at one of the last Ida retreats, those of us who were there decided that we were inspired by Yamani Hernandez, who some of you may know, who is director of the National Network of Abortion Funds and is an Ida. Yamani came and shared what they called a radically truthful dating profile. And so, which was an exercise we all decided to adopt for fun, which was what would happen if you actually wrote a truthful dating profile about yourself. Not that I'm suggesting y'all would lie, but we know a lot of people, you know, don't exactly tell the truth. So here's mine. And Lord, I hope my mother is not here for one line of this, but we're going to read it anyway. So here I am. So bibliophile with 4 eyes, all the better for seeing bullshit. Pit bull person who frankly loves dogs more than most people. Tender-headed and big-hearted. Won't ever change my Southern accent. Prone to extended bouts of sarcasm. Skin the color of cornbread done just right. Resists through overachievement. Born writer and brunch enthusiast. Likes men the way I like my bourbon. Dark, strong, with a hint of sweetness, and goes down easy. My passport has many pages. Recovering holder of Olympic-sized grudges and admitted grammar snob. I always capitalize Black, as in Black people. Behind the scenes pullers of strings. Would love to be a farmer, but I'm way too lazy for that. I expect to be worshipped. I'm a Leo, okay, y'all. But will return the favor. Leo ego tempered by Cancer sensitivity. Craves summer tomatoes and reciprocity. I'm always on team sapiosexual, but can be briefly impressed by the superficial. 6-packs, much appreciated. Underdogs are my jam. I'm an extroverted introvert. Tar Heels basketball fan, known to bellow at the screen. Doesn't believe in guilty pleasures. This is really probably the most important part. Doesn't believe in guilty pleasures. Why feel guilt if it doesn't hurt anybody? Tell me I do, quote, white things and you'll be banished. My talent, superpower, is that I can sleep anywhere, but I'm always awake.
Thank you so much, Cynthia. Stay woke, hashtag. So thank you all so much. I want to take a moment and just invite us. You see the breadth and depth of what is available in this anthology. And I really just want to pause here for a second. And one, there's come through with the copies of the book. And the wine, Samantha, yes. And also just ask for folks to in the comments, in the chat, to just give a little reflection on what you just heard. Just take a moment, and I would love to share some of y'all's thoughts and reflections on the pieces before we get into this discussion. So drop your thoughts in your chats, and also panelists, if you have things that you want to, reflect on what your co-writers shared, I would love to hear y'all's thoughts as well.
I just want to say, first of all, I'm mad that I missed that Ida retreat where y'all did that exercise, because maybe I would have met my boo got married sooner. Maybe I would have met somebody then, but my Tinder profile got me somebody, but I wish it would have been a much stronger profile, especially with all y'all in the room, it would have been lit, but.
Never too late. You partner now, but anyway.
It's just been so beautiful to hear everyone do their pieces, because it's been years since we've written these pieces, and so it just feels it gives me a warmth of familiarity, and we haven't all been together in a while, so it's just a beautiful place to be.
And we got a lot of snaps and positive thoughts and energy in the comments. We got a hashtag bars in the chat. So thank y'all. I thank everybody so much. So we're going to jump into the discussion, and I would love to hear from you all. How and why did you come to Echoing Ida, and what does it and has it meant for you? And anybody can jump in.
I'll jump in. This is Cynthia. I got into Echoing Ida. I guess I'm literally Ida generation, OG generation 1.0. And I think, Samantha, were you in our first cohort too? Or second? It's so hard to remember sometimes. But I came because I was invited by Alicia Walters, who is our founder. And Alicia and I met at Sister Songs conference back in the day and just kind of vibed. And then one day, a year later, she sent me an email and said, will you come on these calls I'm doing with Black women who are writers, thinkers, and game changers? And I did. And so we just started doing phone calls where we talked about ideas. And there wasn't necessarily an idea that we were going to be doing this kind of writing collective. And so, I came because I was called to community. And one of the things that Echoing Ida did for me was really made me think. I'm a scholar, I'm a historian and a journalist, but I define myself mostly as an African Americanist historian. And it made me really start to think about the fact that being a scholar and an activist were not mutually exclusive things for me. And that my words could work change, but at the same time that sometimes they weren't enough. And so, it's made me really do my academic practice in a very different way and think about how I want to do community engaged research, even though, I'm a 19th century historian, so most of the people I research are dead. But anyway.
I can go. So I came to Echoing Ida in 2013. I was at Netroots Nation, and I was one of the first student correspondents with Urge. And Kiera was like, you have to meet this woman. She's fire. She's dope. This person is it, right? And I was like, okay, great. I'm all into it. Writing is I'm eating, breathing, writing. I just graduated, so I was really eager to be active, right? And to build in real ways, real sustainable ways. And so Kiera introduced me to Alicia, and I was smitten, to be real. I was like, oh my God, she's so dope. She's so fine. She's just it. Oh my, I just want to be involved. I'm with it. Whatever you got, I'm down. And so that was the short and sweet way of how I came into Echoing Ida. And then I believe the following February, we had our first meetup in Atlanta. Like I said, just a couple weeks or a couple days ago when I was talking about it, it was that beautiful magic we made in that first meeting that paved the way for what I feel Echoing Ida has been able to manifest, which is just beautiful growth and healing together, in a way that we've gone through our shit, to be very real, but the connections we made in that time and over these years, now about 7-8 years, just have been very historical and very momentous in my life. And so, yeah, that's what brought me in. And I was not leaving. I was with it since then.
I can go next. Similar story. I met Alicia at a For Together event, and she was doing, I believe, Haitian folk dance. She was doing some dance, and then we were talking, and then she revealed that she does Haitian folk dance, and I was like, "Sapase!" And then I was like, "I have to be your friend." And at the time, Echoing Ida didn't have a name. She was like, "Yeah, dancing, I don't know about that, but what we can do across an ocean apart or a country apart is this writing. So let's keep in touch about writing." Well, there wasn't Zoom, Google wasn't, the dancing wasn't going to happen, but there was this option. So I started attending meetings that way. And the reason I stay, I think, is also perhaps even the most interesting question. I think it was the first time I was in a space where you could be a part of a cohort for like 5+ years. You're just here. And it wasn't based off of productivity, like, oh, it is the end of the month and you are required to have written 20 articles by then. And if you haven't, then you're kicked out. It was just like, it was more about how do we find each other and find relationship than it was about productivity. Although the goal, of course, was to influence culture. But I think there's so many ways to do that. And I ended up not being the most, I didn't write as often as others, but there are other things I learned from that space that the space was trying to offer to the world. And I think that is about how we navigate conflict. How do we, because like not conflict as in, ooh, that's bad. Oh my God, if there's conflict, that means that y'all were not perfect, right? Like, I think a lot of people could do really well to like understand that that is like a necessary foundation to having healthy, nourishing relationships. And that's how you build community. And yeah, like how do you hold space where folks can be sharpening each other's tools, sharpening each other's blades, and getting to that higher level of thought, whether that's ending up on some digital paper, on a newspaper near you, or if it stays internal with the people that you have interpersonal relationships with. So just being able to flesh that out is just, I love Echo United for that.
How about you, Quita?
Yeah. So I'm considered an OG Ida, but in fact, I'm like a 3rd generation Ida, I think. Yeah, I became an Ida, I believe it was around 2016. And so I actually ended up being at that first Ida retreat in Atlanta, even though I wasn't an Ida. They had pulled me in. Thank you, Sophia. They pulled me in to talk about Medicaid expansion, because at the time I was a youth organizer with the local RJ org here, and I was doing organizing work around Medicaid expansion, particularly for queer and trans youth of color, and was sharing my own experience at the time of being a young, recently undergrad college graduate who didn't have health insurance, because we were magically talking about this thing called Obamacare that would solve all of our issues, but that's not what happened with the coverage gap, particularly in the South, as states didn't expand Medicaid, and young folks like me who should have been saved by this magical rule of if you're up until 26, you can stay on your parents' insurance, but what if your parents are also low income and don't have insurance? Then you don't either. And so I was at that Ida retreat sharing all of that information, and being there, I was like, this is so cool. Like, I was just like, oh my gosh, these people are so cool. And so I, when the applications opened up a couple of years later, I definitely applied and wanted to be an Ida so bad to be around all of these amazing folks. And I remember after I attended the first retreat that I went to, I ended up in a car to the airport with Cynthia, and I was like fangirling to Cynthia, y'all. It was the dorkiest thing ever. I was just like, oh my gosh, I'm so excited that I got to be in space with you, and I'm really inspired by your work as as a historian historian and academic and all this work that you do. Y'all, it was so nerdy, but that's how I feel about all of the IDAs, actually, is like just being able to be in space with folks who are so brilliant. And it's, you know, when you're in the space as an IDA, it's not necessarily tied to your paid work. So it's like you're not there at a retreat talking about your job. You're talking about the things that you're interested in doing and interested in thinking about. And I love being a part of Echoing IDA because of the IDAs, like the magical brilliance and creativity. Like, y'all, these IDAs so amazing. Yeah, like the things that people write, the art that people create is so beautiful and inspiring to witness. And I was so excited to be a part of the IDAs. Oh my gosh, yes, I did have purple braids back then, Lord. Yeah, I was so excited to become a part of Echoing IDA and was so excited to remain a part of it. And it's been like 4 or 5 years since I became an IDA, and I'm still so inspired by everyone who was an IDA before me and all the IDAs that have come after me. Everyone's just really amazing.
So one of the things I know that, you know, is a big part of the IDA vision and mission is like how we shift narrative, how we do narrative shift work. And so I'm wondering if you guys can talk about like what that means. What is it? Why is that a thing? Why do we want to shift narrative, and how do we actually do that? And what, you know, what does it mean to you to kind of shift narrative? And any one of you.
I can start. I think narrative shift is important, in my opinion, because of who has been able to hold the dominant narratives and who has created those narratives. They are often rooted in oppressive white supremacy and patriarchy, and have oftentimes made invisible Black folks, queer and trans folks. And if we are visible in those narratives, it's oftentimes not positive images of us. And so narrative shift is important because we need narratives that are a wide array of like narratives. Because I feel like when I think about oftentimes like Black narratives that people do want to be visible, the respectability politics within that, the heteronormativity in that, and also wanting queer narratives, like Black queer narratives, Black trans narratives, all a whole array of narratives, and not having these monolithic views of people or of our stories and our experiences, and especially not stories that are rooted in whiteness as the lens that we should be seeing ourselves or others through.
I can say something. You know, I'm a historian, so a lot of my work is interacting with sources and getting to see who got to tell stories. And, you know, narratives are part of the structures that govern our society, for better or for worse. They're like building bricks, and they can be as dangerous as bullets. And so my work as both a writer and historian is to challenge dominant narratives and like to get us to think about, why do I think that, or why do we do things that way? And that's like really critical work. And even like within Echoing IDA, like we have had to do narrative work about like the stories we tell about ourselves and who we are, and how we become more inclusive in our definitions of, you know, how we used to describe ourselves as like for Black women, right? And didn't necessarily have an inclusive vision of what it meant to be a woman, didn't think about non-binary folks in the beginning. And so we've even shifted our narratives and also thinking about like, what is our work, right? Like, what is our work and what is our relationship to the work, whether you are, you know, intentionally in movement, active in movement, or how we can move in spaces that are outside, you know, the normative spaces of productivity and labor. And so, you know, for me, the narrative struggle is perpetual, and it begins, you know, with us and every collective we're part of. And you know, I mean, think about the damaging narratives that are applied to so many of our lives when we're not looking, right? Like, you know, the idea of the Black matriarch, right, destroying the Black family. The, you know, ideas that queer folks are predators, right? The idea, I mean, there's so many, the idea that Black Southerners just stood by when white people ran them over and that we consented to our subjugation. All of those are certainly narratives that have infected my life in some way or another, even if I don't hold all those identities. And so, you know, the narrative struggle, you know, is real and ongoing.
I just had a quick thing to say also. I also think, especially for us at the time, it was about owning our expertise. And for like OG Idas, if you remember in Oakland, it was a hard time when we were initially introduced to this idea of like, how do you own and speak about your expertise, at least for some of us, right? And so I think owning that you are the expert of your experience, right? And you come with a specific background, legacy, richness that no one can take from you, and you deserve to be here, you are here, and you're gonna make your mark here, is something fundamental that I think at the time, largely we didn't necessarily see or feel or have spaces like that in our professional settings or in other settings. And so that's what I think was so impactful, both for us as we had to like grapple with what does it mean to be an expert of our different lived experiences, but also in all the spaces that we then like had our writing out and had to discuss it and move with that.
I love what y'all are naming as this simultaneous, like, we are experts, we don't necessarily have all the answers, because that's also a narrative shift, right? Where we lean on, as we are right now, especially for those in Georgia who are leaning on the expertise of Black folks, particularly organizers who in large part are Black women and Black non-binary people leading these elections. And right, so like this idea of like, you are all the experts, so you also have all the answers, and so therefore you must overexert yourself, but also you're not the expert, you're just a worker and in service of some white-led organization. Is this interesting duality, right? And so I think in addition to this balance, the ways that we presented it, we really pushed for op-eds. Oftentimes, the ways that white supremacy is set up in journalism is that it's like you yourself are not the expert. You have to go find and interview actual experts. You're not supposed to give your opinion. It's supposed to be objective because objectivity exists, right? And so you are the silent but vocal advocate for the true experts out there somewhere. And so to flip that on its head and to say that our inner knowing and our lived experience is enough to qualify us while not speaking on behalf of all Black people, which is why there needs to be more Black people sharing their stories, is I think a unique quality that we put out, because at that time there wasn't really that proliferation of that. You had blogs, right? Blogs have been a thing for a while. People had saying us since 2005. A little MySpace, I think, for folks. But in terms of getting in Marie Claire or other mainstream spots, and I think there was also like a rise of Black-owned like media companies. So instead of just a blog, there's going to be For Harriet, RIP, and other outlets that were like centered on amplifying our voices. It was all happening at the same time. So I just love that we were able to really add to that conversation during those years.
And I think we added to it like in this historical continuum that certainly didn't just start with Ida, but like certainly, you know, Ida, you know, was a big part of it. I mean, because one of the phrases that I love from Ida B. Wells is that she used over and over again was the she was trying to combat the old threadbare lie. And she usually talked about that in terms of the old threadbare lie that Black men were lusting after white women and would just do anything to have them, and that's why they were lynched. But I kind of think of the work of Echoing Ida as, you know, chipping away at or totally tossing all the old threadbare lies that we have been, you know, taught to think about and sometimes even internalized ourselves, right?
I really want to I want to talk about something that you named, Bianca, when you were talking, and I especially because I've organized and been in space with both you and Quita here in Atlanta for a minute. I would love to hear, like, there's a narrative shift moment happening here, right? Around Black women, and especially as it relates to electoral politics. And I would love to hear y'all's thoughts on this kind of current narrative around Black women. It came around in 2018 too, right? With Stacey Abrams' race that was like, Black women are gonna save the country, Doug Jones in Alabama, like that race. And so I would love to hear y'all's thoughts around around this particular narrative shift, how it lands, how it impacts those of us who are here on the ground in Georgia, those of us who've been working and organizing. Is it, in some ways it can be a positive, in some ways it can be not so much. So I would love to hear y'all's thoughts about that particular shift in the narrative.
I can start, and then I definitely want folks to jump in. But overall, I think there's so many avenues to look at it. But something that comes up and feels really alive for me is the praise of exhaustion. We're doing this in the midst of the COVID pandemic, right? And it's just like more money is funneled in now, and we need to get the Black folks out, right? And we need other Black people to be paid maybe minimum wage, I'm not sure, to go out there and canvas to people. And I've heard people say that they're withholding funding and donations to these organizations until they can prove results, right? So it's like you have to sacrifice yourself, potentially get COVID in order to get this win. And then your organization may be paid afterwards. It's so derailing. And I think folks understate how important it is to go outside of Atlanta as well, and how dangerous it is once you leave Atlanta. Georgia has never really had a lockdown. We've never mandated masks. It is a free for all. And the precautions and the care for Black lives only decreases once you leave out, like Metro Atlanta, or once you leave Atlanta proper, let alone Metro Atlanta, let alone once you're out in Macon and Augusta and all those places. So knowing that there's been an increase, so I used to do union organizing. Georgia does not have a history of labor unions. And so when I was up north doing labor union work, you can walk up on people's doors and be like, hey, you want to talk about union stuff? Oh, wow, why don't you come on into my house? When I did that in Georgia, they were like, shh, the hell are you doing? I was like, I'm sorry. They're like, how did you get my address? How do you know where I work? I don't know. I was just given a list. And similar thing with Van, right? You're given this list of voter profiles. You go out there and people are like, no, actually, no, I don't trust you. Actually, no, I don't want to talk to you. And so there's just like inherent risk involved. And I'm not saying that it's like so much more deadly than it is up north. There's anti-Blackness everywhere, but I do think it's important to underscore like how treacherous this was for a lot of folks, particularly because of the pandemic and because of the way that the money was funneled. I don't think it was always going towards like the everyday canvasser who was really putting their lives on the line. And ultimately, we're still praising the exhaustion of these people, and even like the few folks who are getting limelight right now, well-deserved limelight. But what we're praising about these people is that they worked really hard, and there's no emphasis on like what folks should have been doing within their own communities and within their own homes, so that this labor could have been shared.
Thank you, Bianca, for, I feel like, setting the context of the work that people were doing and the results that have been praised, but not a focus on how the results got here. And I think this big push around, like this narrative shift around Black women and electoral power in the South, is my first reaction is Black women and femmes are not your mules. We are not here to save your oppressive ass systems. And the reality is the Black folks who are leading the electoral work here in the South are not doing this to save democracy. They're doing it so that Black people can have a voice and participate in the electoral system, because we have historically been suppressed, voter suppression. I'm just like, yeah, why do you think Stacey Abrams is doing the work that she is? Did you watch as she had an election stolen from her, as the whole nation watched us? How can you be the ref and a player in the game, right? As we watch, as Brian Kemp served as Secretary of the State, being the leader of the election process while being a candidate on the ballot. And so my huge reaction is seeing so many particular white people praising Stacey Abrams and Nse Ufot and Kwajalein Jackson, Black women who are amazing and powerful and brilliant and have done amazing work to get out the vote on the ground, is they are not trying to save you, they're saving us. This is why this work exists. And I'm sure if you had people like them on your staff, you wouldn't like them and you'd be working to undermine them and get them fired because they talk too much and they don't play nice with you and they're always leading their own projects and don't like you micromanaging them. So I just think this huge focus on Black Southern organizing, honestly, people just need to write and send the check and leave us alone. Black people, Black Southern people have been doing radical revolutionary work on the ground for centuries. I'm just like, I don't know where you think Harriet Tubman was leading people to freedom, but it was here. Like, I don't think you know where the civil rights movement happened, but it was here. So we don't need white people to save us. Black people have long been saving ourselves, but we need the structural change and we need white people to save themselves, honestly, because y'all are the most impacted by white supremacy because you're lost in the sauce and you too busy trying to tell us what to do while your mom, your grandma, your wife and husband are voting for people who want to harm you and strip you of your own rights. Because baby, once they get rid of the Black people, the people of color, the indigenous people, the queer and trans people, who will be left? So that's my thoughts on it.
Come on and preach, Danquita. Yes, thank you. And I think all at the same time, right? There are big things happening here, right? There's like, we have movement. I think what has been coming up for me in this moment is like, it's years and years and years of networking and building together and coalition building and building the infrastructure that has now we're starting to see wins, right? And so I think in light of all those things, there's a particular moment that's happening in Atlanta, in Georgia. And so I wanted to ask really about the kind of relevance, especially as Ida is launching the anthology here in Atlanta. And if there's like a what for Echoing Ida is a particular relevance and a particular importance or poignance of Atlanta.
I'll just say, I mean, obviously we talked about the fact that our first retreat was there. So it was the first coming together for us. But, you know, the fact that Atlanta is in the South and the South is such a terrain for so many struggles, whether it are the traditional civil rights struggles, whether they are struggles against transphobic policy, or whether it is immigration. You know, I just think about all the work that has been done in Atlanta, continues to be done by traditional civil rights groups, whether we're talking about, you know, groups like the SCLC, whether we're talking about groups like the Domestic Workers Alliance, and also groups that aren't necessarily like nonprofit 501c3, right? Because there are people doing the work everywhere in Atlanta and beyond. And I just think that we so often frame the South as the capital of American inequality. And so this is really important for us to reclaim the South as the capital of American justice seeking.
I love that. Cynthia, while I have you on the mic, I want to shift gears and ask you to talk more specifically about the anthology. And I wonder if you could talk about how the anthology came to be.
Sure. So the anthology came to be obviously because it was co-created by, and I'm a little frozen. I always get frozen and my face looks terrible in whatever expression it is in. But anyway, so, you know, clearly we co-created it. And for many years, we kind of talked about the idea of an anthology, because while the Ida's cranked out literally thousands of pieces, I don't know if y'all know, literally thousands of pieces over a relatively short time, they weren't together. They weren't always in conversation with each other. And so we wanted to do an anthology, and how it really happened was, like, I had been talking about this with Alicia. People had conversations about the anthology, for a while. And I had a dream one evening that I was in conversation with Jamia Wilson, who until recently was the director of Feminist Press, which published the anthology. And that we were just sitting there, like, out in the sun outside somewhere eating and talking about the anthology like it was a done deal, like it was already in progress. And so I thought about it. I don't know about all of you. I mean, in some ways, I'm an empiricist as a scholar, but I also am a Black Southerner who believes in dreams and, the spirits telling us what to do. And so I emailed Jamia that morning at an ungodly hour and said, hey, I think we're going to do an anthology. Can we do an anthology? I know you love us. And she responded that same day and said, let's talk. And so it was also a great moment for Feminist Press, because they had a Black woman director, a Black woman who is director of their editorial board, and they already knew the Idas and they loved us. So it was a pretty good convergence of, we had a lot of content, we had the will to do it, and we also had the rarity of Black women in positions of power in the publishing system to help this project come to fruition. And so, and I want to point that out. I don't know if you all saw, about maybe a month ago, the New York Times story about Random House and how few Black authors it published after Toni Morrison left, and that almost every Black author published was the responsibility was brought in by Toni Morrison. And so, I think about that. We're writers, but some of us are editors, and we're all communicators in various ways. And we all have the power to open the door for other folks like us. And, hopefully we're not those people who want to be the only one, because I'm never striving to be the only one. I'm striving maybe to be the first in some spaces. I don't want to be the first, but I'm certainly not striving to be the last Black woman in that space.
Thank you, Cynthia. And I want to remind folks that in the middle of the screen on the bottom is the Ask a Question button. So if you have questions for folks, please do click it, drop your question in, and I will bring those questions into the conversation. So Bianca, I'm going to come to you. So the piece that you read was about something that happened shortly after the Mother Emanuel shooting in 2015. And I'm wondering how you're thinking about that, and if your thinking is the same 5 years later, especially coming off the heels of this right-wing armed insurrection. Like, can you talk about that piece in conversation with this current moment? I'm wondering how you're feeling, if it feels similar, if it feels different.
I would also really love to hear what folks think in the chat, and if other folks want to comment who are on the call with me, would love to hear it, because I think both were national moments. I think everybody felt those situations. And so I think what happened to me was like what happened to me on that day to Bianca Campbell's body those years ago. But I think there were so many instances. I think I just walked into that bookstore with a lot of heaviness on my heart. And I'm sure that Sunday, a lot of Black people had that similar heaviness, whether they were hopefully held by loved ones that day, or they were also triggered by white supremacists that day. And so I think similarly, it's like a snowball effect. I think a lot about Naomi Klein's shock doctrine theory. It seems to me that long before even Emmanuel AME Church, right, and the mass shooting there was this seed, and how people turn to whatever's on the ground. That radical idea, that it's like, we're just going to throw that away. We're not going to take it to the dumpster, but we are going to throw it away because that's just a wildly radical idea. Nobody's thinking about that. And then when push comes to shove and you're at your wit's end, that crumpled up piece of paper, that radical idea seems a little appealing. And I think as we enter late stage capitalism, white supremacists that are holding on to what little power they think that they have are turning to these ideas more and more. There's always been extremists. There's always been people writing those papers and other people, other conservatives crumbling it up and saying, no, we're not gonna throw it away, but just no. And now like more and more of these conservatives are saying, well, let's just see let me just read it again, and are coming to more and more extremist terms. And now this idea is not as extreme. I think a couple of years ago, it would have been, maybe not many years ago, maybe in the 90s, it would have been, what? For someone to just walk in with a gun to a bookstore. Now, you've got people saying that this is a legitimate debate. I don't think that's wild. Do you? And it's like, whoa. I think simultaneously, the idea of like some of the rhetoric for the mask wearing or anti-masks has been the messaging that we've been using in abortion access work this whole time, my body, my choice. When it's not in service of late stage capitalism, let's crumble it up, let's throw it away. That's a radical idea. I totally disagree with it. Now that it feels relevant to my interests in preserving late stage capitalism, let us unfurl this and see how we can use this to our advantage. These ideas are inherently not actually radical. They're not actually out there, the ideas that I think that we're proposing, but it's really in the eyes of the holder and who wants to like really latch onto that. So I think that this insurrection, this most recent insurrection, is that snowball, that unfurling of the paper, that is shocking in many ways, right? But my biggest fear is that it's going to be not that shocking in a couple of years. Where I find hope is that we have also been writing papers. We've been literally writing printed and digital papers that I think for the time and even now for some communities seems very out there. And it is my hope that whether you pick it up now, it is still there, and you may uncover this years from now. Communities that used to not engage with us would uncover this paper years from now. And our ideas are also the ideas that become less and less radical over
time. And Quita, you also have a piece in the book that grapples with the Mother Emanuel shooting, and that particularly is looking at trauma, the trauma of the moment for Black people. And I want to say for myself, I remember I'm from the South Carolina Low Country, and I was at home when the shooting happened. I was in my mom's house, and we were watching. I remember watching on the news. And I'm from Beaufort County, where Clemente Pinckney, who was the pastor of the church, and also a state congressperson, had spent a good amount of time in Beaufort County. So we all felt very, very much like he was ours. And so I remember just being in shock. And so I'm wondering, so I remember the trauma that we all had. I remember us trying to figure out what we should do with that and what we should do with that moment. And so I'm wondering what you think in the time that's passed that we have learned as Black people about our collective trauma and our collective healing in that time, and how you feel, if you feel like the movement and our community are the same, or are they different in this moment as we're grappling with the current traumas that we're facing?
Yeah. So if folks pick up the anthology and read the piece, you'll hear my story about my childhood. But I grew up in the church in Georgia, and rural Georgia. And I was in the church every Tuesday, Friday, and Sunday. That was my life. I went to Bible study, all the things, right? And when I heard about the Mother Emanuel shooting, it hit me, because I felt like that could be my church or my mother's church or people I know and love. It hit so close to home. This space that I knew to me in my childhood was a sacred space. And for many folks in my family, church is such a sacred space, especially with the way that racism operates. Black people have their own churches in the South that often, I know for my great-grandparents and great-grandparents went to school at church. Like, churches were the first schools for a lot of Black folks because of racist school systems and racist institutions. And I was actually not at home when the shooting happened. I was on my way to a conference. And when I landed, that's when I learned about what had happened. And the first day at the conference, everybody was kind of going around like nothing had happened. But every time I came into contact with other Black folks, it was like we saw each other and we saw the grief and the trauma in each other. And I went to attend a Femmes of Color session, and the only Black femme who was a part of the panel had actually asked that they scrap the Femmes of Color space and it be a Black femme space so that we could be with each other and hold space for our grief and what we needed. And that space was such a transformational space for me, because I feel like what was common then was, as Black people were experiencing trauma, witnessing traumatic things that were clearly racist, anti-Black violence, we were expected to act like everything was normal, go to work, go to school, just be like, okay, that's noted, just gonna continue on with my life. When we know that it's heavy, because many of us know that we can be shot in our homes, like Breonna Taylor. We fear for our children to go to the store, like Trayvon Martin. We fear for our children to go to playgrounds, like Tamir Rice. And so I think what is different now that wasn't true then is Black people have begun to speak up and be like, I'm calling in to work Black today. I'm not showing up. I'm not going to this meeting. If I go, I'm not going to have my camera on. Like you can't expect me to show up. And as Bianca talked about, in this stage of capitalism that expects us that work is the priority no matter what, creating labor is the overall goal no matter what. But prioritizing our own health, safety, and wellness. And I think something that we were also seeing in social justice spaces, if you were a Black person that worked at an organization, you were still expected to show up, even if your organization supposedly cared about racial justice and Black liberation. And now we're starting to see this shift where social justice organizations give people time off or close down when traumatic things happen. Especially, I feel like a big motivator in this time since the Mother Emanuel tragedy has been the witnessing of Black people being harmed and killed on social media, and the collective trauma as we all witness this. I mean, especially as people who are not Black kind of use these tragedies as teaching moments for people. And honestly, I don't need to witness Black trauma to understand racism. And I honestly am concerned if you need to witness Black trauma to understand anti-Blackness and racism, because that is tragic. Like, I feel like you should be able to believe and trust Black people when we're talking about anti-Blackness and racism, to want to create change versus having to witness us be harmed. And I think Black people are really speaking up and pushing back, and creating a new way of being. And I feel like, people were saying abolish the police years ago, but now it's in public discourse and people are downsizing, reducing the budgets and working towards to abolish the police. So, I feel like, it's, as Bianca was noting, sometimes it's radical at first, but after a while of hearing it over and over again, narrative shift. People begin to understand the importance of what we who believe in a new liberatory world are saying.
Thank you. Yes. And another thing that is in the public discourse a lot more now that has shifted is the conversation around healing justice, right? And around healing. And it's like, not just like we're talking about Black healing and we're talking about Black joy and we're talking about healing justice. And so we're not just talking about Black trauma, but we're also like, how do we hold it? And so with that, I want to turn to you, Samantha, because the piece that you read earlier was this piece around healing and is a part and parcel of the work that you all created, you, Bianca, and Ruth, with the Carib Healing Collective. And I would love for you to talk some more about that work and about why it's important, and how Echoing Ida kind of brought y'all together to that work.
Yes. And Bianca, feel free to chime in if I missed something. We came together around 2016 or so. And it really came from us wanting to build community. From a growing understanding, we were all at different spaces of our journey, our experience with herbs, with using herbs as medicine, with reclaiming some of that knowledge that we felt disconnected from. All of us, as we got together and really talked about what our experiences were with our healing and medicines and different things throughout our childhood, noted that like we had been giving different herbs for different ailments historically. And oftentimes those recipes or that richness of that legacy would not get carried on or passed along, and would sometimes die with our relatives, right? And so that it really came from a yearning for wanting to build community, for wanting to reclaim our grandma's shit, which is something that Carmen, a fabulous doula that I've worked with for a while, always says, right? And I really see healing justice tied to birth justice, obviously tied to reproductive justice, as looking at your whole self, right? And thinking of what is this rich legacy that we already have, right? What are these things that like maybe you got rubbed down in white rum and nobody ever really told you what it was, but you knew that if your house, when you need to make sure you had white rum in the house, because you could use it to mix medicine, you could use it to rub down, you could put it under your nose and clear out your stuffy nose, right? And so like, how are we then going a little step further to reconnect and having these conversations? Carib Healing Collective pushed me to have these conversations with my mom, pushed me to have these conversations with my grandparents, who are now ancestors, pushed me to have these conversations with my siblings who are in different stages of, right, our legacies, right? And have families or don't have families, but are having these discussions about like, what are the things that we used to do or have done, or things that I maybe couldn't name, but I knew that they provided richness or they helped heal me in these ways? And how do I preserve that? How do I grow on that? How do I make sure that, you know what, all I need to heal myself, I can have in my home. I can go scavenge in the backyard and get, right? What does it look like to have vervine and to have that be something that feeds me and heals my womb, right? What does that look like, or heals my reproductive system? What does that look like to make sure that I keep rose in the house, dried rose or moringa in the house? What does that look like to really just regain that understanding that like it's in your DNA, it's in your bloodline, right? And reclaiming that. I think it's also a discussion of expertise, right? Reclaiming that, because it's something that you've always had, and the journey is really just trying to refine that, because it's been something that's been trying to be stripped from you. And so Carib Healing Collective really just sought to do that, and to have other folks like inform the discussion, because we recognize that we're in our own separate journeys, right? We are all at different stages of this herbalism journey. We're all trying to use and create magic in our own ways, right? And we don't have all the answers. And so how are we building this beautiful union, this beautiful collective of folks that want to do that, and folks that see that as we look to this world, right? Like after the revolution, after whatever, we look to this world where we're all free. How are we having and trying on these alternatives and these things that we've already done, right? Our people have already done, to make sure that we know how to heal ourselves. We know how to build with each other. And so that's why I wanted to definitely read that piece in particular. If you get the book, I have some other ones in there. You know, we also talk about pum pum politics. That's another one, right? But what does it look like to have these diversified conversations? I wanted to make sure and bring that. And so that's kind of how the Caribbean Healing Collective came to be. And then Bianca, feel free to add if I missed anything.
I don't think you're missing anything. It's so good. I just want to add, you made me think about how narrative shift happens outside of just like orally telling stories. And so I think immediately about how I think back to we went on a plant walk together. We're all from the same, Ruth was born in Boston, came down here, but in effect, all grew up and had a coming of age moment in or around Miami, Florida, which has a huge Caribbean population. And walking through our hometowns and realizing that so many herbs were just like there, we've thought, well, oh, we're going on an herbal tour. We're gonna like go to, I don't know, some curated garden or something. Oh no. Auntie's just, yeah, it's just here. Everybody just grows it. You just didn't know that it's been in your neighborhood the entire time. Vervine, you pay $15 for a bag of it's right here. How did you not know these plants that have always been in your neighborhood? And not only that, in like this like grows wild out here way, but like in this intentional, hey, I'm moving to the United States. They're wild out there. I'm just here to get a check, but I do want to like have a bit of home with me because I don't trust white people's medicine. So I'm packing some stuff. And it made me think about like my grandmother who was like, oh, you know, we got to smuggle some seeds. And I don't know, I don't think ackee is technically allowed to be grown in the United States, but every house that everywhere that we lived growing up, she's like, oh yeah, I'm gonna plant this ackee seed, and in 7 years we're gonna have some ackee. And we never stayed long enough for the fruit to bear, but she would get another cousin to come over and bring another seed for the next place that we lived in. And it feels like such an ancestral like conversation because of the ways that even folks who were kidnapped from the west coast of Africa would like braid seeds in their children's hair for the voyage, the terrible voyage to come to the United States. And so just like this idea of we are able to share stories and pass down histories without writing, but definitely writing is helpful, which is why we're trying to capture these stories. But there was already this sense of preservation that was important to our ancestors. And we have so many ways to access that. And I'm so thankful.
Thank you. I want to grab a couple questions from the chat. So there's a question I'm going to toss actually the both of these towards Cynthia, or at least I'll toss the first one over Cynthia. That is about whether or not Ida sees itself getting more involved in publishing or producing content in other media formats. Ida is on social media. Follow on Twitter at Echoing Ida. You can find if you follow Forward Together on Facebook and on Instagram, you can find Ida content there. But we are on Twitter for sure. But yeah, that's the question.
Okay. So I can't answer for all of Ida because Ida is all of us, but I know that they're, from the jump, we started as a program that was a seed in Alicia Walters' mind that didn't have a whole lot of institutional support, like at that moment. And then Echoing Ida, morphed and transitioned into becoming a program of Forward Together, even though our collective was already there. And so there's been a discussion like from pretty much the jump. I mean, I remember actually, Bianca, you like really leading a discussion at one retreat in Oakland talking about like, okay, so how do we generate our own media? What do we do? We certainly have Idas who have done that, like creating their own podcasts and their own platforms. And that's like an ongoing discussion, I think, that we'll continue to have in like Echoing Ida, version, 5.0, whatever version it is. So stay tuned. But anybody else have some thoughts about that, about like, self-determination and media production? Oh, and how do you apply? So we just ended a cohort and I'm not exactly sure what the plans are, but you can always find us on Twitter and, we'll make any announcements about changes and whether it's open, on social media.
And I want to capture this question as well. I know Cynthia responded to it in the chat, but Luna asked a question about what is the first step when you are starting to write something. And I would love to hear from some of the other folks around what's the first step when you have an idea and you want to write.
So I would say my initial first step would have been to sometimes write like the first thing that comes to mind, and then I love like visuals, so I make webs. But now in my current iteration, usually when I'm writing, I'm writing because something is like stirring up in my spirit, right? And so now it's a matter of just writing, like letting my hands match the flow of my brain. And, you know, sometimes I miss a word or two, but we're getting like the true essence of kind of what I'm feeling or what's stirring in me. And then going from there. That's been my most recent musings of writing. But yeah, I think, and I want to hear other folks' process too, because I think what we've all learned in our years together is that we all have different processes. And it's been beautiful to kind of share things like what works for you, what doesn't work for you, because we've all had different, some of us have different lulls and things where we write or don't write.
For me, you know, when I was heavy in my writing days, deadlines were the thing that got me motivated because I'm like, oh, this is due tomorrow. Let me crank out this draft for this editor before they have my head on a platter. That was my style of writing. And I actually stopped writing for a long time after grad school, just being forced to write about a lot of things that I did not want to write about. It really had a huge impact. But I think my process now is very similar to Sam's in that when something is on my spirit, just got to get it out. So it's like opening up a Google Doc really quick, or notes on my phone, or a journal app on my phone, or just writing it down somewhere, trying to get it down. Get it out physically so that way I don't lose it. Because I found for years I'd be like, oh, I really want to write this. Like, oh, this is really on my spirit. And then I don't get it down on the paper, and then I forget about it and it just goes out the window.
So we are about at time. I want to do a go round with one last question. And I'm gonna toss it to Samantha to start us off. So in the origin story at the top of the book, Alicia, who y'all have mentioned a number of times, who's a founder of Echoing Ida, is quoted saying that we are more than Ida B. Wells' descendants. We are her echo. And so I would love to hear from y'all. Here's a question. What do you envision as your echo? And what do you envision as an echo of this anthology?
Hey y'all, my cat Miko wanted to make a cameo, so he's in the background. What do I envision as my echo? A radical storyteller, somebody that knows our fight, like what we want, and us to live self-determined, free-ass lives as possible, and we will have it in our lifetime. That is my echo. And what I see as the echo of Echoing Ida, I see all of us. I think we bring something so nuanced and so beautiful. And it's the reason that I've been in Echoing Ida as long as I have. That really, I feel like for each other came at a time when we came to write and talk about our experiences, but we stayed and we helped heal each other. We stayed and we were able to craft and form authentic relationships that we didn't necessarily have in our lives or in our workplaces or in our communities, whether chosen or family, right? And it was something that for me, I hadn't experienced. And I think that is what I feel like Ida B brought to the community, right? Like, this is what I see, this is what is happening, and I want to make sure to capture it because this richness, folks will know that this is a part of history, right? And I think that's what our aim was, to make sure that folks know that we are owning our expertise. We are part of a long legacy of beautiful folks writing about the things that are happening in our everyday. And we want to make sure history is able to note this as folks continue to do that, as folks continue to challenge what is radical and what is not radical, as we get to a point where we're doing radical shit all the time for liberation, right? And so, yeah, that's what I would say.
Bianca, how about you?
Sorry. For me, everything right now is all about my kiddos. I think about like what does it mean for them to eventually read this book one day? I think reading it to them is one thing, but them grabbing it on their own and being like, this is so relevant. Or better yet, wow, y'all used to go through this. Wow. That's what I long for. And I already see it in the ways that like having conversations with them from a very young age about like just about all the things, and then coming to them, like we're playing and I'm like trying to talk to their dinosaur and they're like, you didn't ask my dinosaur for their pronouns, so how can you be in conversation with them? I was like, well, you know what? We all make mistakes, okay? So just seeing that in real time is great, and being able to like model apology. Again, that dinosaur example was real, and needing to apologize to them, to the dinosaur, and seeing how we can make amends. I'm willing to be accountable. Just because I'm an adult doesn't mean like I have all the answers, and I want to figure this out with you. And so I'm hoping that echoing that like vulnerability and echoing that like, I know that you're going to take this further than me, and I know I took it further than other folks. Like, I want this to keep evolving, and I believe in youth power are some of the things I hope continues to echo.
Quita?
Yeah, so I actually, Ida B. Wells is with us. She's above me. And I think the echo that I want to have in the world is being unapologetically Black and free, like Sam said. Being able to be myself and show up authentically to myself in the ways that just really were not safe for my ancestors. And my mom was born in the early 50s, so sometimes she just really be scared for me. It's like a dark-skinned femme out in the world who got the audacity to be queer out loud. You know, she is just genuinely scared for me in ways, and ways that I'm not scared. And I hope future generations are also not afraid to be themselves and to recognize the power of who they are, the power of their Blackness, the power of their ancestry and their history. And I think the echo of this anthology, I was recently speaking with Jasmine Burnett, who's also in Ida, who has pieces in the anthology. And she's like, how are you feeling about this? And I was like, you know what? The streets need this. The streets need us, yo. We've been gone for a minute, but we back with a jump up. And that's truly how I feel. I feel like the world needs more Black, radical, feminist art and work, and our words just, like, we are a salve, like Toni Morrison, Audre Lorde, like, you know, when they were writing, they weren't thinking people 30, 40, 50 years are going to be reading this and connecting with it. But we are, and I see myself in it. And I think this is also true of the anthology, is years from now, people will still see themselves in our work. Hopefully they won't be going through the same things as us, Lord, but I think they will see echoes of themselves in it.
Cynthia, close us out.
So the echo, I mean, there's so many things that I want. I mean, I have to say, I just feel so full because Echoing Ida is a group, but there's so many collaborations and networks and relationships and loves within the group. And I think that the Carib Healing Collective and all these other ways that people are collaborating, like that exceed Echoing Ida, I mean, that's a measure of success by anybody's standards. But I want my echo to be that we are creating new archives for Black people, and that this book is creating an archive of questioning our culture, the society we live in, ourselves, and that, you know, at some point when we all are not here, somebody will look in this book and will not be able to deny that we were.
Ashe. Thank y'all so much. It just occurred to me that I'm like, have all of these like amazing Black women writers in front of me, and then I have my Black women writers wall behind me. And so I'm like, I am surrounded, yes. So I am so grateful to all of you for being here and being amazing, and grateful for everybody that joined us. I believe ER is coming back to say some words, so I'm gonna be quiet.
Thank you all so much. This was a beautiful event. Thank you to everybody who participated in the chat. Thank you to our friends from the Auburn Avenue Research Library. And I hope that we get together in real physical space sometime in the future to celebrate the next iteration of this work, whatever that may be. Take care.